first speaker will be Patrick Hornbeck from the Theology Department at Fordham University on revival statutes, clergy sexual abuse, and COVID-19.
Thanks, Michael. In the months before the pandemic struck, Google searches on the terms religion and epidemic tended to produce two different kinds of stories. One about the opioid crisis, the other about sexual abuse within religious institutions. And in both the Catholic and Baptist traditions, commentators characterize the patterns of abuse and concealment as epidemic. Many state legislatures responded by reforming statutes of limitations, 9 in 2019, creating revival windows during which victim survivors could pursue expired claims against abusers and their employers. And legislators in enacting such laws weighed the competing imperatives of compensation, deterrence, finality, and judicial autonomy. But victims and their advocates have reported that the pandemic has hampered their ability to initiate litigation. And even some Vatican officials have agreed that abuse has moved out of the center of attention during COVID. 3 US jurisdictions' revival windows have been scheduled to close since the coronavirus reached the United States. Montana's biennial legislature was out of session, and so their window closed without debate. Hawaii considered, but ultimately didn't adopt further limitations reform. But in contrast, New York extended its revival window by an entire year. In my blog post, I described the twists and turns that produced each of these different outcomes. In the next several months, windows are slated to close in 3 more jurisdictions: Arizona, Washington, D.C., and New Jersey. And so I ask, what lessons should these states learn from the ones that have come before? First, public and media attention to sexual abuse within religious communities and other human families have dropped sharply in the pandemic. Absent conscious efforts to focus on the topic, revival windows will likely expire as scheduled. Would-be plaintiffs stand to lose entirely when windows are shut, and yet defendants too have an interest in being able to rest confident that the time for claims to be brought has passed. So legislators need to consider carefully the length of any extensions, timing them to compensate for but not exceed delays in the pandemic. But it may not be the duration of a revival window that will most circumscribe plaintiffs' ability to obtain recompense. As we know, many religious institutions and secular nonprofits have felt the economic consequences of the pandemic acutely, and the intersection of COVID with limitations reform has been particularly damaging for the Roman Catholic Church. Even yesterday, one of the country's largest and best resourced dioceses filed a Chapter 11 petition. So the future remains uncertain. The best course of action for historical sexual abuse plaintiffs and those who counsel them is to file claims at the earliest opportunity, as there's no guarantee of political will to extend these expiring windows, nor any assurance that organizations will have the funds to satisfy judgments. So last, for those abused by spiritual leaders and feeling betrayed by institutions, it may actually be an unexpected pandemic that denies them justice. Thank you.